Welcome to the WagerTalk Podcast for the week ending July 28th. We've got a big show tonight as we've got Matt Josephs, a.k.a. Mid-Major Matt's going to stop by and discuss handicapping the smaller conferences and where the advantages are in doing so. That'll be our Handicappers Corner segment. Ralph Michaels and Dave Cokin are in studio tonight. We're going to preview a couple college conferences. We're going to take a look at the big one, SEC, and our local conference here in Las Vegas, the Mountain West Conference. And, of course, at the end of the show, best bets. We've got Nick behind the controls. I'm your host, Marco D'Angelo, so let's get this party started. Guys, we've had a couple weeks off. It's that slow time of the year, all-star break and everything, but now we are in full mode. Football actually starts next week. I think Ralph has mentioned that about 20 times this week. Hall of Fame game next week, preseason football. Means we're less than a month away from real football, college football at the end of August. And guys, we're going to start previewing the conferences. We're going to do, of course, the Power 5 conferences, but there are other conferences out there that you can make money in too, so we're also going to be previewing the smaller conferences. Today, we'll look at the SEC and Mountain West Conference. So let's get things started with the SEC. And guys, when it's the SEC, we know who the big king is, and that is always Alabama. Once again, they are the preseason favorites. They are the number 2 team in the country and the overwhelming favorite to win the SEC again right now. And I'll quote some lines from the Westgate. To win the SEC, Alabama minus 160. Second choice is Georgia at plus 300. I'll start with you, Dave. Anybody can knock off Alabama this year? Do you think Georgia has a shot? They had them on the ropes last year in the championship game.
No, Georgia's got a shot. Alabama's the best team, but it's not by so much distance that they're automatic against Georgia or a few other teams who are very good in the conference. You can't be perfect every week, and so there is a possibility, at least, that somebody could beat Alabama. I'll just use the expression, I wouldn't necessarily bet on it. But it's certainly possible.
You look at Alabama, and we know they don't have the backup anymore. Ralph, Jalen Hurts transferred out, went to Oklahoma. Class act the entire time he was at Alabama. Didn't make waves when he lost the starting job to Tua. But it's Tua's team, no question about that. Incredibly sick numbers they put up last year, Alabama. Not your traditional Alabama team. Nick Saban, finally opening up the offense. He's got a guy that can do it. And if you look at the numbers Tua had last year, Ralph, when you think about it, did he really play maybe how many, I know your guy a lot of times looks at production ad. How many plays per game did he play? Because so many of those games, he was sitting in the second half last year. What kind of numbers would he put up if he played the entire season?
Well, probably not much more because you're not going to keep throwing. Tua's not going. Your starting quarterback's not going to be in the ball throwing late in the fourth quarter. You'd be running ball and running the clock out. So, numbers are there. To me, the win margin's the important thing. Them getting the wins is the important thing. 43-6 was his ratio. It's just you're finding the spots to play against Alabama. We know last year I think they won the first half bets, the first 9 before the Citadel game. They're a team that is better than everyone else when it comes to the field. So you bet them the first quarter, you bet them the first half. But then when they start bringing in their secondary players and letting teams catch up, the defense had a lot of holes. Again, they graduated a lot of people. They returned 6 starters, which is normal for them. But when you start playing those second, third, and fourth string guys, especially at home, that's when teams make those runs in the second half.
Yeah, and Dave, Alabama, the luxury of blowing teams out the way they did last year is a lot of secondary players got valuable time on the field. So, we always – the joke is they never rebuild, they just reload.
Well, it's not a joke. It's serious. They're the best program in the country. It's as simple as that. Clemson's certainly in the argument as the best program in the country, and so I'll say 1 and 1A.
I have Alabama as 1.5 higher than Clemson. I have Alabama as my number one team.
Yeah,
right
I have
now,
Alabama. I have Alabama on my power ratings on top, but it's close.
And most people have Clemson. I've looked at earlier.
And Clemson's got the best player in the country.
Yes, no question.
Lawrence is the best player in the country, and he's still not going to be eligible for the draft after this season, which is a little silly. But you're going to have to play a perfect game to beat him. It's as simple as that.
Well, let's go to the team that almost beat them last year, and that's Georgia. And if you look at this Georgia team, guys, we did a video this week at WagerTalk. You can check those out on our YouTube channel as we started previewing the top 25 teams in the country. And, Ralph, we pointed out that Georgia, although they were a team that had 3 losses last year, you really got to put an asterisk on those 3 losses. They had, in my opinion, the one legitimate loss during the season to LSU, but the SEC championship game, they had that game, the entire game, and then you had the miraculous comeback. Jalen Hurts comes in, rallies the team, pulls the game out, and for Georgia, losing in that fashion, we use the phrase, Dave, they ended up losing the SEC championship game twice because they were a no-show in the bowl game.
Well, same thing with Michigan after they lost to Ohio State. You lose, that's just your bubble burst. I mean, the bowl game doesn't even count.
The bowl game,
that's a joke to even say that's a loss.
I don't even
count Georgia.
I don't even include it in my
I don't either.
Season breakdowns. It's like that was an exhibition game.
I don't look at the yardage at all, so we just ignore that. Georgia is the second best team, but the thing with Georgia is last year they were probably 10 to 12 points clear of the second-best team in the division.
Not anymore.
Now Florida's closed the gap quite a bit.
So have a couple of others.
Yeah, they're going to have a much tougher regular season than they did last year. Even though they lost at LSU, I think they're going to get beat up and have to struggle much more game by game as the season progresses with teams that got closer to them.
The SEC is more balanced this year, and that's not to say that Alabama's still not the best team.
Yes.
And Georgia's probably the second best. But the conference is more balanced this year than it's been in quite a while because there are a load of teams that are in the top 30 nationally. And if you're in the top 30 on any given day, you can beat anybody.
Who's the third team? LSU favored?
No, Florida is third at plus 1,000 at Westgate. LSU's right behind them at plus 1,200. Because of the schedule, because LSU wouldn't have to play. But if you put LSU in the Pac-12, they would probably be a touchdown favorite over
Auburn's the favorite in the Auburn's the favorite in any other conference, aren't they?
Oh, probably, yeah. I can agree with that.
I mean, Auburn. I love this Auburn team. I think and I know they've got a really tough schedule, so that's probably going to cost them a couple of losses somewhere along the line. But I'm telling you, they're loaded. Auburn is really good, and that could be right there. Auburn-Alabama Iron Bowl this year could be something special.
They're plus 1,800 to win the division, as you said, because Alabama is so top-heavy in there. But the rest of those teams are clustered together.
One thing, I will say about Auburn is, Gus Malzahn is clearly on the hot seat after, 7, 8 wins. He's only had one 10-win season in the last 5 years. But I will go out, and this isn't a crazy statement because there are so many good combos, but the Auburn O-line and D-line are the best combination of football, period.
There's no excuses for Auburn this year. Even with a tough schedule, I think to go over their win total and to be playing, to be contending for a playoff spot.
Yes, they have the best combination of offense and D-line in the country. So, we talk about starting on the lines and moving backwards. If they're going to get some play from Joey Gatwood, the freshman, or Bo Nix, they're still not sure who's going to win that job. They're a team that I have them, I think, as a 16-point favorite to Alabama, but that could be closer to 8 or 9 as the season progresses if they get freshman play, like Tua, or not even to Tua and Lawrence's level, but just 70% of that.
They have a huge Week 1 game too, massive game against Oregon. That is it's a neutral field, and if Auburn loses that game, you're immediately going to have the hot seats talk on Malzahn, which could be a big negative for them.
Yeah, because then they go to A&M again in Week 4. So.
If they win against Oregon, though, watch out. And they are favored to win that game, and I think they will win that game.
Now, unlike Alabama, that can have one loss and still be in the championship game, if Auburn gets that loss early in the season, do you think they can overcome that?
No, absolutely. If they win the SEC championship,
But what I'm saying is if they get that loss early in the season, I think it could set a negative tone for a team. That's the dicey part of Auburn. Their talent level is outstanding, but mentally, I think they could be fragile.
So if you're asking me hypothetically, if Auburn lost to Oregon and won the rest of the games, including the SEC title, yes, the SEC champion's in. It doesn't matter if it's 2 losses, the SEC champion is in, clearly. So the loss isn't going to kill them, but I totally agree with Dave that with your coach on the hot seat and only having 8 wins and having the second or third toughest schedule in football. You talk about the Oregon game at Arlington, then they have to go to A&M, then they have to go to Florida, then they have to go to LSU, and then their last 3 weeks they host Georgia and Bama. So
the tough schedule.
The schedule is just it's incredibly brutal.
How about LSU, guys? This is a team that every year, a lot of hype with them. They've had the coaching change. Ed Orgeron's been there now for a couple of years. Got to get that offense going. What is it about LSU and not being able to?
I don't know. The pieces are there, and everybody loves Joe Burrow. So maybe this is the year LSU explodes offensively. We know that what they've got on defense, they've got so much speed. It's silly on defense. And if Burrow lives up to some of the hype, they could be a playoff team.
I agree. I said if anyone can beat Alabama, it's going to beat LSU. And I might have even bet LSU to win the SEC if they hosted Bama. But they host Auburn, then they have a bye, then they have to go to Alabama. I was totally wrong on Joey Burrow. I watched him at Ohio State. I didn't think he would do well at LSU. Came out, completed 64%, a 16-5 ratio. From what I've been reading with LSU, they expect to be one of the fastest-paced teams in the country this year. They're working it out now. They'll continue to do it in summer practices. They are going to be completely up-tempo. The run-pass option, Joey Burrow is a quarterback that can do it, and they're going to be able to catch a couple teams off guard early, I think. I love them at Texas week 2. I think they're going to put Texas in a different
I'm
level.
not as high on Texas as some
neither am
people
I.
are.
When we get to that, I picked Texas 4th. In the Big 12 this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
When I had lunch this week with the guys from Touchdown Alabama, the game that they said that is going to be the big game this year was the LSU game.
Yeah,
that's the game.
No question.
That's the game that they talked about with us.
Supposed to be the biggest game.
And you look at LSU and Ralph, I like offensive linemen. They bring back 4 offensive linemen on here. You've got 8 offensive starters in total. LSU, but I just feel like every single year I buy into the hype on LSU and the offense just disappoints me. We'll see if it gets done. Let me say this, year 3, Ed Orgeron, is he on the hot seat to make that next step? I know the kids love him.
I don't think so. He went 9-4 his first year. He went 10-3 his second. How can he be on the hot seat when you improved each of your first 2 years? He took over a team that had 8 wins, brought him to the next level. So
they'd have to fall on their face.
Yeah, I don't think he's anywhere near the hot seat.
No.
All right, guys. Anybody else you want to mention you think has a shot?
Not as a shot, but I'll just mention them as to me they're the mystery team is Mississippi State. Look, I know the guy's supposed to be an offensive genius, but they sure weren't very good offensively last year. I think they're going to try and throw it more this year with Fitzgerald out of the mix. Fitzgerald couldn't throw the ball. The problem is, I watched their spring game, and the accuracy of the quarterbacks was still lousy. And they've got to find somebody who can throw the football where it's supposed to go, or they could be a disappointment. And a team on the rise. And it's amazing that the program was at this level for as long as they've been, because it's a great program.
It has to be the Volunteers.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. I mean, this is a program that should never have slipped to the depths they have, but they made a bad hire and a coach who just wasn't very good. Now they've got everything lined up, and I think Tennessee's ready to start making a major move. I think they're a top 30 team now.
Yeah, Garetano's the real deal quarterback. 16 returning starters, 10 on the offensive side.
And that crowd gets back into it. Of 100 and whatever thousand that show up at Neyland. Tennessee's going to be a handful this year, and they could be really good by next year.
Yeah, losing those last 2 games to Missouri and Vanderbilt just had to be a devastating way to go in the offseason. You think Jeremy Pruitt can turn it around. Marco, I have a couple teams I want to still talk about.
Okay.
Texas A&M, I'm a Jimbo Fisher fan. I love what he's done. They only have 4 back on the defensive side, 7 on the offensive side. They are a much better team, but I don't think it'll show in the record. They play at Clemson. They play at Georgia. They play at LSU, and then they host Alabama. Those are 4 losses right there. So they're a team that is better than their record, but won't be there. And on the opposite side,
Kentucky.
Well, Kentucky, yeah, but I was going to mention
because I think Kentucky's going backwarbackwards.
Yeah, well, we talked about it on the sports line.
And they just lost another player. One of their defensive backs got hurt. He got hurt yesterday or today, and he's out for the season. Quad. He's going to need surgery. And that's a big hit for them on defense. So, and then I think you were going to head to Missouri.
Missouri is a team that is good, but they'll finish better than they should because they don't face Alabama, they don't face Auburn, they don't face LSU on the crossover schedules. So they have the easiest schedule in the SEC, where likewise South Carolina behind them. Missouri, I believe, will be a home dog to South Carolina, but South Carolina
when is that game?
Faces those teams. That game's in September 21st, week 4.
Yeah, they might. We'll see.
Yeah.
South Carolina. The problem with South Carolina, a lot of people are down on Muschamp, and I'm one of them. So.
Oh, he's had 3 years now, and he hasn't. 7 wins.
I think he's on the hot seat.
Yeah. A couple of the teams that you mentioned, and you talk like Texas A&M's one of the teams. Remember, you've got some coaches that are in year 2, and I always preach that year 1, even though it's a big name coach making the switch, with Jimbo Fisher going to Texas A&M, you're still inheriting the other coach's players. It's not really till year 2 that you've got your system implemented and you start getting your guys put into it.
I actually think it's year 3.
For full value, but you're going to see some of it in year 2. You're definitely going to see more in year 2 than you saw in the first year. So I think second half of the year, I think you're going to see much more improvement in some of those teams where, based on what they did last year, and Tennessee being a team like that too, that you might find value with these teams later in the year because the other teams are going to be overvalued and they might be slightly undervalued. Any closing thoughts on the SEC before we head out the break?
No, that's enough for me.
Yep. It was a good little recap, and it's going to give you some perspective on where teams are going to finish. And, you have to remember there's 2 different things. Where a team finishes in the division doesn't mean how good they are. Right. With the crossover games, it's a big difference. If you're not facing LSU and Alabama versus a team that is, that's a 4-game difference in the standings there with 2 wins and 2 losses.
All right, good stuff as always, guys. We're going to step out for a quick break. When we come back, we are going to take a look at conference right here in Las Vegas. UNLV is in the Mountain West Conference. We're going to preview that conference up next here on the WagerTalk Podcast.
It's Manic Monday, and that means every pick at WagerTalk.com is just $9. Get a play in any sport valued at up to $30 for just $9 each and every Monday at WagerTalk.com.
Welcome back to the WagerTalk Podcast. We're going to take a look at another conference, guys. This one is right here, close to home. Our UNLV Running Rebels in the Mountain West.
The Running Rebels are not in the Mountain West in football. There are no Running Rebels in football.
Running
Rebels is strictly basketball.
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah.
I've been here how many years? It's just the Rebels. Yeah. Okay. I did not know that. Shows how much
and the baseball program is the Hustlin' Rebels.
The Hustlin' Rebels. Okay. Well, they ain't been running and they ain't been hustling. The UNLV Rebels.
They're running
the wrong way.
No, they're going to have a good running team. I don't know that they can do anything else well, but UNLV is going to run the football.
Can they win any games here?
Nah.
Yeah, they can win a couple.
Okay, so look, the Arkansas. I mean, we'll talk about UNLV for a second. Obviously, they're not in the mix as far as the conference title is concerned. But for the over and under prop, the big game is Arkansas State. That's the game that probably decides whether they go over their win total and whether they have a chance to get to 6 wins in a bowl game. Arkansas State's better than they are, but they're going to catch Arkansas State in a good scheduling spot, and maybe can knock them off. If they can, UNLV could be a 6-6 team. If they can't, I think the wheel might come off early, and they could be looking at 2-10. Wouldn't surprise me because they've got the one non-conference game they'll win. Outside of that, they're not going to be favored in any conference games, I think, other than San Jose State. maybe Hawaii. I'm not sure. But that Arkansas State game is enormous for UNLV very early in the season.
They do bring back 9 offensive starters, 4 on the O-line. So the Rebels, as you said, will be running, Dave.
Yeah.
I got to ask you this question. For Tony Sanchez, what is the win number he
6.
needs to keep his
Got to
job?
get to a bowl.
Yeah.
And here's the problem I have with UNLV and with some other programs as well. And this is, so I'll go on my soapbox for a moment here. Everybody wants to play super warp speed football right now because that's the way everybody does it, right? If you've got a bad defense and you're a running football team, you should be huddling up and shortening the game as much as possible. That's the way you win doing that. Oh, yeah, and by the way, there is a precedent out there. It's called Army, for crying out loud. Army with
Navy for the last decade.
Yeah, I mean, Army doesn't play hurry up. They will once in a while to try and catch the other team by surprise, but generally they're huddling up. They run the football and then go out there and keep their defense reasonably fresh. It's a small, undersized defense. They don't have a lot of talent on defense, but they keep them reasonably fresh by putting these time-consuming drives together on offense. UNLV playing fast is stupid, okay? It's bad coaching, and it's stupid because their one strength is their running game with some good running backs and a quarterback who's very good with his feet, much better than with his arm. Their defense isn't any good. They should be playing, I'm not saying they should be playing option-style football, but playing the same game plan in terms of the clock management as an Army. And they won't do it. And that to me is, right there I look at the coach and say, you don't know what you're doing because you're doing, and I could be dead wrong because maybe they'll start doing that. I don't know. I haven't seen the practices. But most teams don't, and it makes no sense. And it's just one more element of the college football that drives me nuts is copycat syndrome. Oh, well, the top 10 teams are doing it this way, so we have to do it that way as well. And it's actually a bad idea for most of these programs.
Dave, one of the videos we did this week when we talked about Oklahoma, and I talked about how bad Oklahoma's defense was last year.
Awful.
But what didn't help them is their offense was too good and scored too damn fast. You have a drive that's a minute and 30 seconds, and you're sending your defense right back out on the field. A bad defense is going to be even worse when you have them out there for more plays than they should be. And that's, it's great to have an offense that can score, but they needed to because they were giving them up almost as fast as they were scoring them last year.
Well, but at least Oklahoma's an offense that was balanced, and they'll have a balanced offense again this year. I'm talking about teams that know in advance we're going to have to run the football to have a chance to win. Well, and if that's your offense going in, then you don't want to play hurry up.
Use every second of that play clock.
Yeah, your top receiver's 400 yards, 12 yards per carry. That doesn't get it done on the offense.
Armani Rogers can't throw.
Armani Rogers, I went to the spring practice, and he couldn't hit guys in the spring. And I don't want to bash a guy local, but he when he throws an out, it sails. It always sails over the guys' heads on outs. I don't understand it.
He's a great
to have
athlete.
Such a strong arm, yeah.
Well, he's got a strong arm, but I mean, there's been pitchers in baseball with really strong arms who have no idea where they're throwing the baseball. Well, it kind of works that way in football as well.
When you talk Mountain West, the teams year in and year out, always Boise State, Fresno State, San
Fresno
Diego
just
State.
the past couple years. I would say Boise and San Diego State over a decade, yes.
But this year, and I'm going to get your guys, I want to jump to a different team for a second because I'm hearing a lot of buzz about Utah State this year.
Well, because they've got a great quarterback in Jordan Love, and he can really make things happen. But do they have the pieces around them on offense? I mean, they're basically plugging in almost a whole new starting offense. They've only got a couple of guys
two
back.
Returning starters,
right.
Jordan Love and an offensive lineman, and that's it.
Yeah, so I think they're getting a little overhyped, to tell you the truth. I mean, I think they're a nice program, a borderline top 50 program, but that puts them in the same. On paper, Boise's the best team in the conference.
Right.
Utah State looks like they'll be okay because I do think they brought in some decent talent. Fresno State is not as good as they were last year, but they'll still be okay. In San Diego State, it's the same old story for San Diego State, which is, can they find somebody to play quarterback? But by the way, here's the flip side of dumb coaches who play hurry up all the time. San Diego State still huddles up They run the football and rely on defense. And there's nothing wrong with playing that way. And Rocky Long basically gets the most out of his team almost every year. And if San Diego State is able to balance their offense a little bit this year and get some production out of the quarterback spot, I don't know if they can or not. But if they can, then they'll win the league because they're going to be better. They're going to be better elsewhere than they were last year. Last year was, you could almost say, a rebuilding year of sorts for San Diego State. I think they had a lot of young guys playing last year, and I think they're going to be considerably better than they were last year if the quarterback play is improved.
Yeah, last year they were a team that just, and a couple times they were in the right spot, and I was on San Diego State, and big disappointment to me last year, and it's not a typical Rocky Long type.
No, but they were
team.
very young last year. They graduated a lot of guys off that 2017 team, which was a really good team, and I did not think they were a disappointment last year. They ended up kind of where I thought they were going to be, but I had the asterisk next to them all year long going, wait till next year, because they had some good freshmen on the field last year who are going to be better this year.
You know, you were 4-4 in conference play. You had a 7-6 record. You go to Nevada, you had the lead, you lose by 4. You go to Fresno State, you lose by 9. And then the season finale against Hawaii, they're a 17-point favorite, and they lose that game. Yeah. So, you know, they had a disappointing finish on that. And, you know, when you have Agnew as your quarterback, you know, he was a junior, but his first year starting, 51% completion.
Yeah, and I just don't know.
I just
don't know. I don't know if he's.
But Washington's as exciting as they get. They got 2-3 running backs, and you know they still, like you said, they still use the fullback, and having the unique 3-3-5 defense. I mean, it doesn't matter. He shuts down the option every year with that, and he just, even though people see it every year, just his defense is the special unit on the field.
He's a perfect this level college football coach. I don't think Rocky Long is a big time program coach, so I don't know that he'd fit at, an SEC powerhouse or something like that. But for San Diego State, it doesn't get much better than Rocky Long.
Yeah. Consistency has been there for the last decade. I mean, last year was a disappointment, obviously, but as you said, they were young. One last note on Utah State. When I look at them in the hype around the quarterback, and then you make the rest of the team just because of the quarterback, it is reminding me of a couple years ago. In the same conference, we had all of the hype with Wyoming because of
Josh Allen.
Yeah.
But he played hurt the whole year. That's what I mean. Josh Allen got torn apart.
Josh Allen had NFL type hype. Yeah. This guy just has all conference type.
But in
hype.
Josh Allen's last year at Wyoming, he played with an injured shoulder the whole year, and it obviously affected his accuracy. And so they said, "Oh, flop, he's going to be a bust." Now he's fine, and we're seeing what he can do. And so take that with a grain of salt. With Wyoming being a flop a couple of years ago with Allen at quarterback.
You know, I'm also going to mention two things. They go to Wake Forest, a close game. They go to LSU, so you're going to have 2 losses on your chart there.
Well, I don't know about that.
They might have a shot at Wake Forest.
We talked about Wake Forest earlier, but here's the other big reason. Your crossover games, you have to go to San Diego State, and you have to go to Fresno State. When those are your crossover games, that gives you at best 1-1, most likely 0-2, and that puts you so far behind. I have Utah State 3rd in that division, and I have Boise 2nd in that division. And I have Air Force to win that division.
I like Air Force this year.
I think Air Force with 14 starters back is huge. You don't get 14 starters back at Air Force. Last year, you had 10 starters back. They were still plus 32 yards per game in conference play. This year, 14 returning starters, including Hammond at quarterback. Last time they had 14 starters back, they had a 10-win season in 2016. I think they do have to play at Boise, but it is early in the year with Boise's young quarterback. I think that gives them an edge. I'd much rather go to Boise early in the year than let that freshman mature and play them later in the year.
Now, they're the sleeper team in the conference.
So if they pull that upset in Boise, they win that division. And, again, I told you I'm going to have 2 WTF picks.
Okay.
Air Force is my pick to win that division.
That division. All right, well, give me the other WTF one.
It's Hawaii. Hawaii, 18 starters back. I love what Rolovich has done.
He is so innovative.
You have more. You look at San Diego State, 12 returning starters. You look at Fresno State, 9 returning starters without their quarterback, and they lose O.C. DeBoer, who I love, who went to Indiana. And you have 18 returning starters. You have games favorable. Your late schedule is San Jose State at UNLV. San Diego State has to come to you. Fresno State has to come to you. I think it lines up perfectly for them to pull some upsets. And Air Force Hawaii in the probably least attended Mountain West championship game ever.
And by the way, you got to love Rolovich. Mountain West Conference Media Day brought a fortune teller with him.
He said no one else will pick us, so maybe the fortune teller will.
He did. It was great.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to give a sandwich spot alert, Ralph. Air Force, when they go to Hawaii, they're going to be going to Hawaii off of playing at Navy, which is always big rivalry game. Then they've got key conference game against Fresno State. Then they go to Hawaii. I think that's going to be a bad spot for them going to Hawaii. And after the Hawaii game, they got Utah State at home, and then their other rivalry game, Army. You look at that 5-game stretch.
That's a tough stretch.
That's a stretch. And then if you're high on Hawaii, I think this is a nice upset alert for Hawaii because Hawaii's been so bad for so long. They're going to be undervalued all season long.
Let's hold off on that because if they go out and they give Arizona a game or pull the upset in the very first night of college football this year, they won't be undervalued. Okay.
And I'm going to agree with you, Marco, but I also want to disagree with you to a degree.
That's a lot of degrees.
Number one, Hawaii is at a disadvantage because they did not face Air Force last year. It's not like you saw the options multiple years. So this is the first year these people have seen the Air Force. This isn't that yearly schedule. This is the crossover game. So number one, not having seen that option is a big deal. Number two, it's Air Force. We know these academy kids are special. When you find a normal sandwich spot, it's not always the same for these kids who are so regimented and do what they do for their normal schedules. They don't have those big letdowns and sandwich spots like some other teams do with a bunch of freshmen that are not to the same level of the academy schools.
The other thing there is that you've got one team that wants to play at warp speed, and Air Force is going to try and take them out of their game by
really can ruin a team's rhythm. Yes, by keeping the offense on the. So I don't disagree. It's an incredibly tough spot, but again, if anyone can do it, I think it's the military kids.
All right, guys, wrapping it up. The price is there. Boise is the overwhelming favorite to win the conference,
and they're the best team on paper. And I still look. I mean, I might be in the minority in this, but I just don't think they're particularly well coached, and. I think they're going to find a way not to win the conference. I don't really know who's going to beat them, but I would not bet Boise to win the conference.
One last note about the Broncos, too. Harsin has been there this is his 6th year. Boise has had a returning quarterback 6 of the last 7 years.
Not this time.
So every year they have someone that comes back and is a returning starter. It's happened where someone beat out someone another season and they beat the job. So to have a returning quarterback 6 of 7 years, it makes this offseason entirely different than they've had in the past.
He's 52-15 straight up. However, against the spread, only 32-32.
Yeah, and just not great in big games. Hey, I mean, let's call it straight. They just have not won. They've fallen on their face in their most of their bigger games over the last few years. And the one that really comes to mind is the Oklahoma State game, where a lot of people liked them, and they actually went off the favorite in that game. Yeah. And they ended up just getting killed in the second half.
Boise State last year, 2 losses. San Diego State, Fresno State in conference play. Guess what? Boise State avoids San Diego State and avoids Fresno State on the crossovers. So that's the difference. If you're looking at Utah State and Boise State, no San Diego State, Fresno State for Boise. Utah State has both.
Yeah, that's a big, and that's why they're the overwhelming.
Oh, yeah, I'm not going to, and on paper, they're the best team, too, so,
All right, guys, great stuff as always. We're going to step out, take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to have our guest, Matt Josephs, Matt Josephs, a.k.a. mid-major Matt
Jacobs. Matt Jacob wrote for one of the local papers.
That's
And
subconsciously.
by the way, is a very good guy.
Yeah, he is. Both guys are very good guys, and you're going to meet Matt Josephs next here on the Wager Talk Podcast.
Every Tuesday, WagerTalk.com offers a best bet selection from its hottest handicapper. It's a great way to introduce yourself to WagerTalk.com with a big best bet winner for just $2 on $2 Tuesday.
Welcome back to the Wager Talk Podcast. It's time for Handicappers Corner. Each week we try to talk about some handicapping angles and different things to make you a better handicapper. And we are going to bring in, first time on the show, and I am excited about it, it is Matt Josephs that we're bringing in. You may know him better as Mid-Major Matt, and that's how you can follow him on Twitter. His Twitter handle is @MidMajorMatt. You can also follow him over at sportsmemo.com, our sister company. And Matt, welcome to the show. Glad to have you aboard. And your moniker, let's just dive right into it. Everybody knows you as Mid-Major Matt. You love those smaller conferences. We have a guy here at Wager Talk, Brian Leonard, the Big Mac attack. And but with Brian, it could be an actual Big Mac, or it could be the MAC conference. Usually it's both. But for you do like these smaller conferences. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got into the industry and why you like the smaller conferences.
Well, I work. I'm a radio host in Richmond, Virginia. I will host a show from 3 to 4 here in Richmond, Virginia, with our ESPN radio affiliate, and we do a lot of talk of handicapping there. And of course, it's big time FCS country in Richmond with the CAA teams, JMU and Richmond and William and Mary. And there's a lot of guys out there, especially on both sites, Wager Talk and Sports Memo, who they specialize in the big conferences. And that's not to say I won't dip into the SEC or the Big Ten or any of those conferences, but I feel like there's an angle to be had in some of these smaller conferences. I think there's prime look-ahead spots. I think if you look at certain weeks, some of these big conference teams will take on the MAC or the Conference USA or the Sun Belt and have a big game the next week, and so they'll kind of overlook the little guy. And I think a lot of times you're going to see value in a Conference USA team, in a Mountain West team even, a AAC team. And I think there's a little bit of an edge you can have here that Vegas doesn't know about.
Hey, Matt, Ralph here. I completely agree with that. And, Marco's famous for his sandwich spots, and a lot of times you get those situations, even Alabama against the Citadel last year. But I also want to mention to our listeners that you can have the reverse situation. There are some Sun Belt teams that have to get to 6 wins. If they have a conference opponent before an SEC team or after an SEC team, there's times those teams don't give that same effort because they know their goal is to get to 6 wins, get to a bowl, or get to their conference championships. So while most people think sandwich situations are only the big teams looking past the small teams, the reverse holds true just to a certain degree.
Yeah, there certainly is, and there's teams like App State who probably don't have to worry about that. App State's going to be a team that's going to approach 10, 11 wins potentially this year. But yeah, you've got all these teams. If you look like Troy or like Louisiana, Louisiana Monroe could be approaching 6 wins. You're right. They take some of these games and they flip it around a little bit, and it takes a good handicapper to kind of see, all right, just because there's a sandwich spot in the bigger conferences, there's also big-time rivalry games in these smaller conferences that these teams are certainly more focused on than the SEC or the ACC opponents.
When you talk about these Power 5 conferences, Matt, you're almost talking at the same level of information that you do for the NFL. I mean, everybody knows everything that's going on at Alabama. It's what's going on at Clemson and these powerhouse programs. So to find that edge where maybe Vegas has made a mistake in the number, it's not going to happen as much as when you're in these smaller conferences because, let's face it, there's no way they can know as much about these lesser teams as they do the big teams. And for you, I got to imagine it's an edge in football for sure. But when we get to college basketball, you've got so many more of these mid-major type conferences. It's got to make it that much tougher for the bookmakers when they're setting these numbers, especially early in college basketball season when you've got the NBA underway, you've got the NFL still going, we're wrapping up the college football season. They can't be on top of these small conferences in college basketball, especially early in the year.
Yeah, it's funny. I was telling Kelly about this just about 2 or 3 years ago. There was a team called Fort Wayne, which is now, they changed their name so many times, but it's Purdue Fort Wayne. They have John Conchar, who used to be there. They were a covering machine, and nobody would be able to pick them out from a map. Nobody would ever probably look at their games on college basketball Saturday when there's 80 such games. But I started betting on this Fort Wayne team with John Conchar, and they started scoring a lot of points, and their defense was bad, so the overs were the play. Every year you find a team, much like last year, I latched on to Buffalo football, and Buffalo football had a huge year, and they had some great value with some lines like the Temple game when they played on the road. You find these teams that maybe you hope are undervalued, and if North Texas had been undervalued under Seth Luttrell at times. So you find that team, you latch on, and you hope that Vegas doesn't realize how good or bad they really are.
Yeah, there was a college football team a couple years ago. Every week I would keep asking the question, and they weren't covering, but they were getting action every week. Who was betting Idaho a couple of years ago? Every week you'd look, the line would open up at this. You'd see it early in the week move 1 or 2 points off the number, and then they kept getting crashed. So it does work both ways, but there, definitely I think you can find the value in these teams. Tell our listeners that when you are looking at these teams, what are the things that you like to look for, Matt, where you think that this team's going to be better than the public thinks they are?
Well, first off, you go with returning starters and you go with returning coaches. Does the coaching staff have a good continuity going? Do they have a lot of their kids back? Do they have the right grad transfers? Everybody can pick up a bunch of grad transfers, but are they the right ones? Do they fit in the system? Do they fit in certainly in a spot? And as we talked about already, scheduling spot, I'll let you in on one that I'm definitely going to be interested in, because in week 2, you've got Tulsa traveling to San Jose State. Now, the Golden Hurricane aren't great, and we know San Jose State isn't very good. They win like 1 or 2 games a year. But Tulsa opens up the season at Michigan State. They're going to get beat up in that game. They may come out of it with a bunch of injuries. And then the next week, they've got Oklahoma State, a Big 12 team at home, a game their first home game of the year. They're going to be really excited and focused for it. And in between, a really random trip out to San Jose State, a team that's got a quarterback returning. I know the Spartans will probably be underdogs in this one. I'm hoping it's like a touchdown or something, but this is one of your sandwich spots. So certainly scheduling spots is something that I look forward to, too.
Yeah, that's absolutely that would be what I would call the foot-long submarine sandwich on that one. Definitely a great spot. And, it's easier to, I think, with these sandwich spots, find them with the smaller teams, as you said, because I think the highs and lows for these teams is easier to pick out than those big, the big conferences where, let's face it, in the SEC, if you're in Alabama, you've got a bullseye on your back every week. So teams are coming at you every week. It's like trying to swat flies off. So they can't really take a week off, but yeah, there are spots. If it's, I love, as Ralph mentioned, the SEC team scheduling the cupcakes in the next to last game of the season is such a joke because, but hey, kudos to them. They get their team in, get a team healthy, go through basically what's a scrimmage, and then have the big game on deck. And, people just look at Alabama and see the name. They're not betting against them. You can, you got to hold your breath sometimes whenever you make those wagers, but they're the right spots.
The funny thing about the SEC gets bashed often because they're playing the SoCon Conference. That's what they traditionally played, or an FCS team late. Well, most of the other teams are playing those same teams. They just play in week 1, and they don't get that same type of hype. When you get it in the middle of your season before your rival, people think there's something wrong with it. Well, that's just scheduling. Other teams could do the same thing. The SEC just spreads out their conference games more, whereas the Big Ten and Pac-12, you have your non-conference games and you play your conference schedule. The SEC, I enjoy those early SEC games. It puts more pressure on those teams playing those conference teams early in the year.
Matt, any other tidbits you like to look at?
Yeah, it's also, we talk about it, and there's not a ton of books who put out spreads for these, but the FCS, FBS games, the right FBS team to get against the right FCS team, I look at in my neck of the woods, James Madison. They've thrown some scares on teams as of late. They've got West Virginia week 1. It's a JMU team that's returning a ton of talent against a West Virginia team that's breaking in a new head coach. I'll be interested to see what the spread is there. But once again, I guess the overwhelming thing is, don't overlook every game on the board. There are a reason why you can bet on every game. You may not have a reasoning for it. You may not have a want-to, or you may never have heard of both teams, but there's a reason why it's on the board, and there may be some value betting, Incarnate Word or whoever the FCS team is in week 1. If they've got a ton of starters and they're going against an FBS team that's breaking in a new system or a new quarterback or a new head coach.
Matt, back at the North Coast days, I used to do the crossover games, the FBS and FCS, and had incredible success. Just FYI for you, last year, the Las Vegas Superbook started putting out lines on every FCS versus FCS game as well.
Oh, I think that's great. I mean, I do a lot of CAA stuff, and Richmond and William & Mary, they're both not going to be as good as JMU. JMU, in a lot of places, is being ranked in the top 5. Look, you got to do the research. You can't just jump into it, read one thing about, North Dakota State and say, well, I think they're going to cover. You have to read what the coach says. You have to look at the roster, the depth charts. Sometimes the depth charts aren't right. So you have to be committed and willing. Like, it's almost not even too early right now to start looking at week 1 at some of these FCS, FBS games, reading practice reports, seeing what's right, what's wrong. But you have to be willing to put in the work, and that's another reason why, the mid-major moniker, I'm willing to put in the work to look at the FCS teams, to look at the Conference USA, to look at the Sun Belt.
Great stuff, Matt. I'll tell you, we're going to have you on the podcast several times this year because I love the stuff that you're doing. We're very happy to have you at Sports Memo. Great young handicapper that, again, is attacking the market, going to an area that, we talk about information is key. But there's just not as much information readily available in these smaller conferences. So if you do the homework, as Matt does, it gives you a big leg up. For years, Brian Leonard has made, a living out of the MAC conference, following that conference as closely as he does, because it was in his area. He went to Akron, so, he was interested in that, but it presented a lot of value. Now, in the last several years, because they got the ESPN contract playing those weekday games late in the season and everything, the MAC gets a lot more exposure than it did in the past. So I think some of the value is getting sucked out of that conference. But, Matt, hope you're available throughout the season. We'll dial you up a couple times, at least get you on here once a month to share some insights with us. And if you got something good you want to share with us, you know how to get a hold of me, and we'll get you on to talk about it. Anything else you want to promote?
My phone lines are always open for you guys.
All right, and you do a podcast as well, right?
I do. I appear on every once in a while. I'll do some videos with Kelly, and I'm on in Richmond, Virginia, from 3 to 4, and I do some handicapping. I'll talk to coaches and players from teams in the area, and we do a lot of NFL too as well. So 3 to 4 weekdays on ESPN Richmond in Virginia.
Good stuff, Matt. Appreciate you being on, and you can follow Matt on Twitter at MidMajorMatt, and you can also find him at Sports Memo, and he will be doing videos with Kelly and such, and be on our various podcasts. And if we get you out here to Vegas, Matt, we got to get you in studio to do some videos with us. Love to have you.
I will certainly do so. Thanks so much, guys.
All right, have a good one. That was Mid-Major Matt Josephs. Guys, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, it's time for Best Bets. Ralph and myself are going to deliver a best bet coming up next. Welcome back to the WagerTalk Podcast. Before we jump into this week's Best Bets, I've got a very special offer for our listeners.
Marco's going nuts tonight, guys.
We're going to give away a $500 discount for Ralph Michaels and myself. You can get a 12-month all-access package, normally $19.99. use coupon code POD500. That's POD 500. You can get Ralph Michaels 12 months or myself 12 months. All plays, guys. That's everything. All sports for a 12-month calendar year for $14.99 with that $500 coupon.
Marco, let's put it in perspective for our listeners. That's an NFL season. That's the college football season. That's the college basketball season. That's the NBA season. And that's 12 months of baseball. And again, a second perspective. Our price at WagerTalk right now for college football and the NFL, just football through the Super Bowl, is $12.95. That means we're giving them a year of baseball, college basketball, and NBA for about $200. What a deal.
Yeah, it comes out to about $4, just a little over $4 a day for 12 months. Get everything that we have. All right, guys, let's get to why you're listening. You want that best bet. We've got best bets for you. Friday night baseball. We're going to go to Ralph Michaels. Let's start with you, Ralph. What is your best bet on the card for Friday?
Well, the St. Louis Cardinals are a team that were very home-heavy the first half of the year and struggled on the road. Well, now they're coming out of a series at Pittsburgh. Unfortunately for you, they swept your Pirates, but they're coming back home with a lot of confidence. Marco, I just did a tweet. If you follow me at CalSportsLV, I did the most profitable pitchers since June the 1st. Well, guess who's number one on that list? The pitcher I'm going with, Flaherty, for St. Louis on Friday. And guess what? He's a dog. The Houston Astros, even though they're struggling, even though they have some issues with pitching, even though they're not hitting like they're accustomed to, they're still a road favorite with our Queedy on the mound. Excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that. I think there's a lot of value with St. Louis. I think they should be at least a 120-plus favorite. We're getting them at a dog price. It's my best bet for Friday. Take us to your best bet, Marco, please.
Well, we're going to go to the West Coast. We're going to take a look at Baltimore at the L.A. Angels. Now, guys, the Angels are in action tonight against Baltimore, so obviously we don't know the outcome of that game as we're taping the podcast before it. This is a bad spot tonight for the Angels. They're coming off of sweeping the season series against their crosstown rivals, the Dodgers. Now, for the Angels and the Dodgers, the rivalry, it's the same way with the Mets and the Yankees or the White Sox and the Cubs. It's a rivalry, but it's bigger rivalry for one of the two teams. Obviously, I like to look at the little brother of the series. You know, the Mets, it means much more for them to beat the Yankees. For the White Sox, much more to beat the Cubs, and for the Angels to do the same against the big brother Dodgers. They did it. Both swept the two-game series at the Angels and at the Dodgers, finishing it up. So tonight, I think you're going to get maybe not their best performance on Thursday night, returning home after playing that series. But I think if they do lose tonight, or regardless if they win or lose, but even more so if they lose, you'll get an even better effort out of them on Friday night. Griffin Channing, he's a guy that came up, a lot of fanfare when he came up. Had some good outings, then had some bad ones, but he did come back with another strong effort, and that's the buy sign, I think, for him back in the groove. On the flip side, you're going to say, but, hey, Marco, look at the last outing that the Baltimore pitcher had. Wojciechowski pitched a gem against Boston last time out, but that was at home. And I look for a letdown after his best start of his career. You've got the old fat and sassy after playing Boston and pitching the way he did. He went into the eighth inning, pitched a shutout, gave up only one hit, had that no-hitter going. This is a guy, 10 strikeouts, 2 walks. I look for the letdown from him. Channing, coming off last outing, he went 5 strong at Seattle, on 1 walk, 6 strikeouts, gave up 2 runs. I look for him to dominate, and I don't have to sit here and run down all the stats on Baltimore of how bad they are. This is a spot where I'll go ahead and lay the 1.5. the Angels have been scoring runs, much more potent offense. I think we see a lot of runs here. I'm going to go ahead, take the Angels, lay the 1.5 runs for my best bet.
I am going to give you one number on Baltimore. And you look at Baltimore, and you see a couple pockets of wins in there in the season where they played well a couple times, and Bundy pitched okay a few games. And if you negate their first few games when they beat the Yankees, when Baltimore is a 200 dog since the 19th of April this year, they're 2-23.
2-23.
On the run line, they're 6-19 with the 1.5 runs. So you're playing into that 6-19 record. And again, 6-19 on the run line plus 1.5 runs just shows you how bad they are getting a beat when they're that size dog, which means they don't have one of their top 2 pitchers going.
All right. Thanks for the assist on that one, Ralph. And that's going to wrap up the show tonight. Want to thank our guest tonight, Matt Joseph. Good stuff from him. Can't wait till we get into the season, Ralph, where we could actually ask him for some games on the schedule for that week, get some of those little nuggets from those mid-major conferences. Again, thanks to Dave Cokin being in studio, Ralph Michaels, and Nick behind the controls. Just want to say a quick shout-out to our former producer. Mark Seidel had been with us since we started the podcast. He's moved back home in North Carolina. So shout-out to Mark. We appreciate everything you've done with the podcast with us, and best of luck in your new ventures. But, Nick, thanks for joining us tonight. Good job at the controls, making sure Ralph and I sound good, and Dave, and not making too many mistakes other than Ralph busting my stones through the breaks all night. One of these times we're going to go with live and let you hear how these guys treat me during the breaks.
It wouldn't change.
It wouldn't change? No.
Well, like we say, if we're going to talk about you with the microphone off, we're going to talk about you with the microphone on. That's no difference.
Okay. All right, Ralph. He's Ralph Michaels. I'm Marco D'Angelo. Till next week, guys, let's cash some tickets. This has been the WagerTalk Podcast.